The steady beeping of medical monitors filled room 742 at Mount Sinai Hospital, where Emily Chen adjusted the IV drip with practiced precision. Her patient, business tycoon Richard Harrison, lay unconscious following a severe stroke that had left Manhattan's elite buzzing with speculation. But Emily wasn't concerned with his Forbes ranking or the empire he'd built. Her focus remained solely on his recovery. At 32, Emily had spent the last decade perfecting her craft as a critical care nurse, earning a reputation for exceptional dedication to her patients. Her small frame and gentle demeanor masked an unwavering determination that had carried her through countless night shifts and difficult cases. But something about Richard's case touched her differently. Perhaps it was the way his children had barely visited since his admission 3 weeks ago, leaving their father largely alone despite his critical condition. The morning light filtered through the hospital window, casting long shadows across Richard's peaceful face. Emily checked his vitals for the 100th time that shift, noting with satisfaction that his numbers showed slight improvement. As she recorded the readings in his chart, she heard the distinct click of expensive heels approaching down the hallway. "I assume there's been no change." Victoria Harrison's voice cut through the quiet room like a knife. Richard's eldest daughter stood in the doorway, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that probably cost more than Emily's monthly salary. Her brother James, equally well-groomed in designer wear, lingered behind her with an air of detached boredom. "Actually, Mr. Harrison's vital signs have shown improvement over the past 24 hours, Emily reported professionally, maintaining her composure despite Victoria's dismissive glance. "His brain activity has increased and—" Yes, Victoria interrupted, waving her hand. "Just ensure he receives the best care possible. Our family's reputation depends on it." She barely spared a glance at her father's unconscious form before turning to her brother. "James, we need to discuss the interim CEO appointment before the board meeting." Emily watched as they discussed business matters over their father's hospital bed, their voices hushed but intense. Neither seemed particularly concerned about Richard's condition beyond its impact on their corporate interests. The scene made her heart ache. She'd grown up in a modest family where love and care for each other were paramount, despite their limited means. As days turned into weeks, Emily found herself spending extra time in Richard's room. Even after her shifts ended, she'd talk to him softly about her day, read him the newspaper, or simply sit in comfortable silence while completing her paperwork. Research showed that coma patients often benefited from human interaction, but there was something more, a connection she couldn't quite explain. One quiet evening, as Emily was adjusting Richard's pillows and quietly humming a melody her mother used to sing, she noticed his fingers twitch. Her heart raced as she quickly checked his responses. After 3 weeks of stillness, Richard Harrison was showing signs of consciousness. "Mr. Harrison," she called softly, pressing the call button for additional support. "Can you hear me? If you can understand me, try to squeeze my hand." The pressure was faint but unmistakable. Tears welled in Emily's eyes as she felt Richard's fingers wrap weakly around hers. It was a moment of pure joy, the kind that reminded her why she'd chosen this profession in the first place. The next few hours were a whirlwind of activity as doctors performed their assessments. Emily immediately contacted Victoria and James, but their responses were oddly tepid. "We'll stop by tomorrow during business hours," Victoria had said, her voice distracted. "Just keep him stable." As the night shift took over, Emily prepared to leave, gathering her belongings and taking one last look at her patient. Richard's eyes were now open, though still unfocused, and his breathing had steadied. She approached his bedside to say goodnight, as she always did. "Rest well, Mr. Harrison," she said softly. "I'll see you tomorrow." To her surprise, his hand reached out, catching her wrist with unexpected strength. His voice was raspy from disuse, but his words were clear. "Thank you for being here when they weren't." Emily felt her heart skip a beat. She hadn't realized he'd been aware of her presence during his coma, that he'd somehow known about her extra hours and gentle care. The moment their eyes met, something profound passed between them, an understanding that transcended the usual boundaries between patient and caregiver. Little did Emily know that this moment would mark the beginning of a journey that would challenge everything she thought she knew about love, family, and the true meaning of wealth. As she left the hospital that night, her mind spinning with the implications of Richard's words, she couldn't shake the feeling that her life was about to change in ways she never could have imagined. The following morning, Emily arrived early for her shift, her heart racing with anticipation. But as she approached Richard's room, she heard raised voices that made her pause in the doorway. Victoria and James had arrived earlier than expected, and the scene before her made her blood run cold. "Father, you can't be serious," Victoria was saying, her voice sharp with disbelief. This nurse has clearly been manipulating you while you were vulnerable. We'll have her transferred immediately." Richard's voice, though weak, carried an authority that made everyone in the room fall silent. "You haven't been here, Victoria. Neither of you have. While you were busy fighting over my company, Emily was the one who showed true care for my well-being." Emily stood frozen in the doorway, her heart pounding. She knew she should walk away, that this was a private family matter, but something kept her rooted to the spot. The tension in the room was palpable, charged with years of unspoken resentments and complicated family dynamics. The scene was about to explode into something that would change all their lives forever, and Emily found herself at the center of a storm she never saw coming. Emily stepped back from the doorway, her heart racing as Victoria's words echoed in her mind. She hadn't done anything wrong. She'd simply cared for her patient as any dedicated nurse would. But now she found herself at the center of a wealthy family's drama, and the implications terrified her. Miss Chen, Dr. Williams, the head of neurology, called her name from down the hallway. "A word, please?" Following him to his office, Emily's mind raced through every interaction she'd had with Richard Harrison. Had she crossed any professional boundaries? Had her extra attention somehow been inappropriate? The doctor's serious expression as he closed his office door did nothing to calm her nerves. "The Harrison family has raised some concerns," Dr. Williams began, his tone carefully neutral. "They're requesting your immediate removal from Mr. Harrison's care team." Emily felt her world tilt. "But Dr. Williams, Mr. Harrison's recovery has been remarkable. His vital signs have improved consistently under the current care plan and—" "Emily," he interrupted gently, "this isn't about your competence. You're one of our best nurses. But when a family like the Harrisons makes demands—" He spread his hands helplessly. "They're our biggest donors. The new wing of the hospital bears their name." She understood the implications. Money talked, and in this case it was shouting. But before she could respond, there was a knock at the door. A hospital administrator entered, looking flustered. "Dr. Williams, Mr. Harrison is demanding to speak with you. He's threatening to call his lawyers if Nurse Chen is removed from his care." The situation quickly escalated into a power struggle that left the hospital administration walking a delicate line. Richard Harrison, despite his weakened state, proved to be just as formidable as his reputation suggested. By the end of the day, Emily remained on his care team, but the victory felt hollow as she faced increasingly hostile treatment from Victoria and James. "They'll make your life miserable," Sarah, a fellow nurse, warned during their break. "The Harrisons aren't used to not getting their way. Are you sure it's worth it?" Emily thought about Richard's progress, about the trust she'd built with him, and about the fundamental reason she'd become a nurse. "My patients come first," she said firmly. "Always." Over the next few weeks, Richard's recovery continued to improve, but the atmosphere in room 742 grew increasingly tense. Victoria and James made it their mission to find fault with every aspect of Emily's care, documenting their complaints and demanding endless reviews of their father's treatment plan. But it was during their absences that Emily saw a different side of Richard Harrison. Away from his children's cold ambition, he revealed himself to be a man weighted down by regrets and loneliness. "I built an empire," he confided one evening, as Emily checked his vitals. "But I lost my children in the process. They learned to value wealth over compassion, profit over people, just like I taught them." Emily paused in her work, moved by the pain in his voice. "It's never too late to change," she said softly, "to show them a different way." Richard's eyes met hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You remind me of their mother," he said quietly. "She was a nurse too, did you know that? That's how we met, before I made my first million. Before I became this." He gestured vaguely at the luxurious private room with its view of Central Park. The revelation stunned Emily. She'd had no idea about Richard's humble beginnings or his late wife's profession. It cast his children's attitudes in an even starker light. They'd rejected their own mother's legacy of caring for others. As Richard grew stronger, their conversations deepened. Emily found herself sharing stories about her own family, her immigrant parents who'd worked multiple jobs to put her through nursing school, her younger sister studying to become a teacher. Richard listened with genuine interest, and sometimes she caught him looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. One afternoon, as Emily was helping Richard with his physical therapy exercises, Victoria arrived unexpectedly. The look on her face when she saw her father laughing at one of Emily's gentle jokes could have frozen hell itself. "I've seen enough," Victoria announced, pulling out her phone. "James, get over here now. We need to discuss father's mental competency." Richard's face hardened. "Victoria, enough. No, father, you're clearly not thinking clearly. This woman has somehow manipulated you into believing she cares. But we all know what she's really after. Our family's attorneys will what?" Richard's voice cracked like a whip. "Will protect me from the only person who's shown me genuine kindness in years, who's reminded me of what really matters." He struggled to sit up straighter, his face flushed with emotion. "Your mother would be ashamed of what you've become." The words hung in the air like shattered glass. Victoria's face went white, then red with fury. "How dare you bring her into this? You're the one who taught us that sentiment is weakness, that success is everything. And now you're letting this gold-digging nurse turn you against your own children." Emily felt sick. She wanted to defend herself, to explain that she had no ulterior motives, but she knew it would only make things worse. She started to step away, to give the family privacy, but Richard's hand shot out and caught hers. "Stay," he said firmly, not taking his eyes off his daughter. "Victoria, you and James have spent years proving you learned all the wrong lessons from me. Emily has helped me see that. And if you can't understand that there are things more valuable than money, then perhaps it's time I made some changes to my life and to my will." The threat hung in the air like a sword. Victoria's eyes narrowed as she looked between her father and Emily, calculation replacing anger. "This isn't over," she said quietly, turning on her heel and stalking out of the room. Emily's hand trembled in Richard's grip. "Mr. Harrison, I should go. I don't want to cause problems between you and your children." "Emily," his voice was gentle but firm, "you've shown me more humanity in these few weeks than they have in years. And please, call me Richard." As she looked into his eyes, Emily felt something shift between them, something that both thrilled and terrified her. This wasn't supposed to happen. She was supposed to maintain professional distance, to focus solely on his recovery. But somehow, in caring for Richard Harrison's physical healing, she'd connected with his heart as well. Later that night, as Emily lay in bed in her modest apartment, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You'll regret this. The Harrisons protect their own." She stared at the message for a long time, knowing that her life had just become infinitely more complicated. But as she thought of Richard's smile, his gentle wisdom, and the way he'd defended her, she realized that some things were worth fighting for, even if the fight seemed impossible to win. What she didn't know was that Victoria Harrison was already setting in motion a plan that would test not only Emily's dedication to her patient, but everything she believed about love, loyalty, and the true nature of wealth. The morning newspaper landed on Emily's desk with a sharp slap. The headline made her stomach drop. Harrison family questions father's medical care, allegations of manipulation surface. Her hands trembled as she read the carefully worded insinuations about her professional conduct, complete with quotes from anonymous sources close to the family. "Don't let them get to you," Richard said from his bed, his voice stronger now after weeks of therapy. He'd been moved to a rehabilitation floor, making steady progress that impressed even the most seasoned medical staff. Victoria's always been good at using the media to get what she wants. Emily tried to smile, but her eyes stung with unshed tears. The article wasn't just attacking her professional reputation, it was questioning her very character. Her phone had been buzzing non-stop with messages from concerned colleagues and family members. "This isn't just about me anymore," she said quietly, sinking into the chair beside his bed. "They're trying to get me fired. The hospital board is meeting this afternoon to discuss the situation." Richard's face darkened with anger. "I won't let them destroy you for showing me kindness." He reached for the phone beside his bed, but Emily gently stopped him. "No, please. Using your influence would only prove their point. I need to handle this the right way." The board meeting was everything Emily had dreaded. Victoria and James Harrison sat with their legal team, presenting a carefully crafted narrative of inappropriate behavior and professional misconduct. Emily sat alone, her hands clasped tightly in her lap as she listened to them twist every act of compassion into something sinister. "We have evidence," Victoria announced, sliding folders across the table, "of Nurse Chen spending unauthorized time with our father, engaging in personal conversations beyond the scope of her duties, and potentially influencing his decisions about his care and other matters." Dr. Williams cleared his throat. "Williams. Miss Harrison, everything in these records shows exemplary patient care. Your father's recovery has been remarkable, largely due to Nurse Chen's dedication." "Dedication?" James scoffed. "Is that what we're calling it? Our father is talking about changing his will, about restructuring the company he spent his life building. All because this nurse has somehow convinced him that we're unworthy children." Emily finally spoke up, her voice quiet but firm. "Mr. Harrison came to those conclusions on his own. I've never discussed his personal affairs or influenced any of his decisions. I'm simply doing my job, caring for my patients' physical and emotional well-being." The meeting dragged on for hours. But in the end, the board couldn't find any concrete evidence of wrongdoing. Emily kept her position, though she was warned to document all interactions meticulously going forward. As she left the meeting, Victoria caught up with her in the hallway. "You think you've won?" she hissed, her perfect makeup unable to hide the fury in her eyes. "This is just the beginning. We've hired private investigators to dig into your past. Everyone has secrets, Miss Chen. We'll find yours." Emily stood her ground, though her heart was racing. "My only secret is that I believe in treating patients with compassion. Your father responded to that because it's what he's been missing in his life, what you and your brother stopped giving him long ago." Victoria's laugh was cold. "You sound just like her, our mother. She was a nurse too, you know, always talking about compassion and caring, right up until she left us." Emily frowned. "Your father told me she died." "Is that what he said?" Victoria's smile was bitter. "I suppose that's easier for him to believe. The truth is," she walked away. Couldn't handle the pressure of being Mrs. Harrison, of fitting into our world. She chose her precious nursing career over her own family. She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "History has a way of repeating itself, Miss Chen. Remember that." The revelation left Emily reeling. As she made her way back to Richard's room, her mind was spinning with questions. Why had he lied about his wife? What really happened to the woman who'd supposedly inspired such tender memories? She found Richard sitting in his chair by the window, staring out at the city skyline. Without turning, he said, "Victoria told you about her mother, didn't she?" Emily moved to stand beside him. "Why didn't you tell me the truth?" Richard's shoulders sagged. "Because the truth shames me. Margaret, their mother, she was like you, compassionate, dedicated to her patients, unwilling to compromise her principles. I thought I could change her, mold her into the perfect corporate wife. When she refused to give up nursing, to play the role I'd scripted for her, he closed his eyes. Pain etched deep in his features. I gave her an ultimatum: her career or our marriage. And she chose her career, Emily said softly. No, Richard corrected, finally turning to look at her. She chose to remain true to herself. I was the one who made it an impossible choice. I destroyed our family with my pride and my narrow vision of success. He reached for her hand, his grip surprisingly strong. That's why Victoria and James are so threatened by you. Emily, you remind them of everything their mother stood for, everything I taught them to reject. The moment was interrupted by a knock at the door. A stern-looking woman in an expensive suit entered, followed by two men carrying legal briefcases. Mr. Harrison, she announced crisply, I'm Diana Winters from the State Medical Board. We're here to investigate serious allegations about your care and Nurse Chen's conduct. Emily felt the floor shift beneath her feet. This was no longer just a family dispute or hospital politics. Victoria and James had escalated to a level that could destroy her entire career. Richard's grip on her hand tightened. Emily, he said quietly, whatever happens, remember this. You've shown me what real wealth looks like. It's not in bank accounts or corporate empires. It's in the capacity to care, to remain true to your principles even when the world tries to break you. As the investigators began setting up their recording equipment, Emily squared her shoulders. She had done nothing wrong except care too much, love too deeply. If that was to be her downfall, then she would face it with the same grace and dignity she'd learned from her patients, especially from Richard Harrison, the man who'd unexpectedly captured her heart while she was trying to help heal his. What she didn't know was that across town, in a small cafe far from the hospital's pristine corridors, Victoria Harrison was meeting with someone who would change everything. Margaret Harrison herself, the woman who'd walked away all those years ago, now ready to return and reclaim her place in the story. The medical board investigation had turned Emily's life into a maze of depositions and documented statements. Every interaction with Richard was now scrutinized, every moment of care dissected for possible impropriety. But nothing could have prepared her for the woman who walked into Richard's hospital room that Thursday afternoon. Margaret Harrison carried herself with the quiet dignity of someone who had nothing left to prove. Her silver hair was elegantly styled, but her hands, her nurse's hands, showed the same dedication to care that Emily recognized in her own. The room fell silent as she entered, the years of absence hanging heavy in the air. Richard's face went pale. Margaret? His voice cracked on the name, as if speaking it might make her disappear again. Hello, Richard. Margaret's voice was gentle but firm. She turned to Emily, who stood frozen by the window. And you must be Emily Chen. My daughter has told me quite a bit about you. Emily's mind raced. Victoria had orchestrated this, but to what end? The former Mrs. Harrison's presence complicated everything. The investigation, Emily's relationship with Richard, the delicate balance they'd all been maintaining. Why are you here? Richard demanded, struggling to sit up straighter in his bed. After 25 years, why now? Margaret moved closer to his bed, her movements measured and calm. Because history is repeating itself, Richard, and this time I couldn't stay away and watch another good nurse be destroyed by our family's dysfunction. The tension in the room was interrupted by Victoria's arrival. She stood in the doorway, a triumphant smile playing at her lips. Perfect timing, Mother. The board investigators should be here any minute. But Margaret's next words wiped the smile from her daughter's face. Yes, and I'm here to tell them exactly what happened 25 years ago, the full truth, not the convenient story this family's been telling. Victoria's composure slipped. Mother, we discussed this. You agreed. I agreed to come back, Margaret cut in sharply. I never agreed to help you destroy an innocent woman's career. She turned to Emily, her eyes full of understanding. You see, Miss Chen, when Victoria found me, she painted quite a picture, claimed you were manipulating Richard. taking advantage of his vulnerability. But watching you these past few weeks, seeing how you care for him, I recognized myself in you. Emily found her voice. You've been watching me? Margaret nodded. Victoria hired private investigators to track me down, convince me to help her save her father from another gold-digging nurse. She smiled sadly. Instead, those investigators showed me something else entirely. They showed me you, Emily. Your dedication to your patients, your integrity, the way you've stood firm against enormous pressure. You're everything I tried to be, everything this family tried to stamp out. Richard's voice was hoarse with emotion. Margaret, I was wrong. All those years ago, I was so wrong. I thought I was protecting our family's reputation, our legacy. Instead, I drove away the best part of who we were. And now you're trying to do the same thing to Emily, Margaret said, turning to Victoria. Using the same tactics your father once used against me. Threats, investigations, public humiliation. But this time, it stops here. Victoria's face had gone white with fury. You have no right. I have every right, Margaret interrupted. I'm here to testify to the medical board about the Harrison family's history of attacking healthcare workers who don't bow to their demands. About how your father once tried to have my nursing license revoked when I refused to quit my job. About how I didn't abandon this family. I was forced out, threatened with legal destruction if I didn't disappear quietly. The room fell silent as the weight of her words sank in. Emily felt tears burning in her eyes. Understanding finally the full scope of the battle she'd unwittingly stepped into, Richard reached for Margaret's hand, his own trembling. I've lived with that shame every day since you left. Watching Emily these past months, seeing her strength, her dedication, it forced me to face what I did to you, to our family. Margaret's expression softened. We all made mistakes, Richard. I should have fought harder, should have shown our children that standing up for your principles isn't weakness. It's not too late, Emily said quietly, finding courage in Margaret's presence. For any of us. Victoria stood rigid by the door, tears streaming down her face. You left us, she whispered to her mother. Do you know what that did to us, what it turned us into? Margaret moved to her daughter, gently taking her hands. I know, sweetheart. I know what happened after I left, how you and James learned to build walls, to value control over connection. But look at what it's cost you. Look at what you're becoming. The moment was interrupted by James bursting into the room, followed by the medical board investigators. He stopped short at the sight of his mother. What's going on here? He demanded. Margaret straightened her spine, every inch the nurse she'd always been. What's going on is that I'm about to give my testimony to the medical board about everything, past and present. The lead investigator looked between them all, clearly sensing the charged atmosphere. Mrs. Harrison, you have information relevant to this case. I do, Margaret said firmly. Information that will show a pattern of behavior from this family, one that needs to stop here and now. As Margaret began to speak, Emily watched the carefully constructed walls of the Harrison family begin to crumble. Each word was a truth too long buried, each revelation a step toward healing wounds that had festered for decades. Richard reached for Emily's hand, drawing her close to his bedside. In his eyes, she saw not the wealthy man fighting for control, but someone finally learning to let go of the very things that had poisoned his family for so long. What none of them realized was that Margaret's testimony would set in motion events that would transform not just Emily's future, but the entire Harrison legacy. As the sun set over Manhattan, casting long shadows through the hospital windows, the truth about love, sacrifice, and the real meaning of care was about to reshape everything they thought they knew about family, wealth, and what truly matters in life. Margaret Harrison's testimony to the medical board lasted for hours. Her steady voice, recounting years of systematic attempts to control and manipulate those who didn't conform to the Harrison family's expectations. As she spoke, Emily watched Victoria and James, seeing the gradual transformation in their expressions from anger to shame, and finally to understanding. The pattern is clear, Margaret concluded, her voice firm but compassionate. This family's wealth became a weapon, wielded against anyone who threatened their perception of control. I left not because I chose my career over my family, but because I refused to become someone I wasn't. Emily Chen now faces the same choice I faced 25 years ago. The only difference is that this time, I'm here to ensure history doesn't repeat itself. The lead investigator, Dr. Sarah Martinez, closed her notebook with a decisive snap. Mrs. Harrison, your testimony has been invaluable. Miss Chen, in light of this new information and the overwhelming evidence of your professional conduct, this investigation is closed. Not only are you cleared of all allegations, but the board wishes to commend your dedication to patient care in the face of extraordinary pressure. Relief flooded through Emily, but it was tempered by the weight of everything else hanging in the balance. The truth had been revealed. But at what cost to this already fractured family? Richard's voice broke the silence. Victoria, James, come here. His children approached his bed hesitantly, like scolded children rather than the powerful executives they'd become. Look at what we've done to ourselves. Look at what I taught you to become. Victoria's carefully maintained composure cracked. You taught us to be strong, Father, to protect what's ours. No, Richard said softly. I taught you to confuse strength with cruelty, to mistake control for love. I've had a lot of time to think in this hospital bed watching Emily work. Every day she shows more strength in her gentleness than I ever did in my demands for power. James shifted uncomfortably. But the company... The company? Richard laughed, but there was no humor in it. I built that company because I thought success would fill the emptiness inside me. Instead, it just made the void bigger. I pushed away your mother, turned you both into versions of my worst self, and nearly destroyed another good woman's life for the crime of showing me genuine care. Margaret moved to stand beside her children, placing a hand on each of their shoulders. Your father and I both made mistakes. We let pride and fear drive us apart, and you paid the price, but it's not too late to choose a different path. Emily tried to step back to give the family privacy for this moment of reconciliation, but Richard's hand caught hers. Stay, he said firmly. You're part of this too. Your compassion, your unwavering dedication to doing what's right. It didn't just help me heal physically. It showed all of us, what we'd lost sight of. Victoria looked at Emily, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time. I thought you were after our money, our name. I couldn't understand why else someone would show such care without wanting something in return. Because it's who she is, Margaret said softly. Just like it was who I was before this family's wealth and expectations tried to change me. The question now is, who are you going to choose to be? Victoria? James? Will you continue the cycle of fear and control, or will you finally learn what real strength looks like? The silence that followed was heavy with possibility. Outside the hospital window, the sun was setting over Manhattan, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. In that moment of quiet reflection, something shifted in the room, a collective understanding that they stood at a crossroads. Victoria was the first to move, taking a step toward Emily. I owe you an apology, she said, her voice thick with emotion. What I did, was unforgivable. Not unforgivable, Emily replied gently. Just human. We all make mistakes when we're acting from fear. James joined his sister, his usual polish cracking to reveal genuine remorse. We can't undo what we've done, but we can try to do better going forward. Father, if you'll let us, we'd like to learn. Richard's eyes filled with tears. Of course, but first, there's something I need to say to your mother. He turned to Margaret, who had remained a steady presence through it all. I was wrong, Margaret. So terribly wrong. Can you ever forgive me? Margaret's smile was gentle but tinged with sadness. I already have, Richard. The question is, can you forgive yourself? As the family began the delicate process of healing decades-old wounds, Emily felt a profound sense of peace. The love between her and Richard had grown, not despite the challenges they'd faced, but because of them. It wasn't a fairy tale romance of a wealthy man and a humble nurse. It was something far more real and precious. A connection forged through genuine care, tested by fire and proven true. 3 months later, Emily stood in the garden of Richard's estate, now transformed into a celebration of new beginnings. The hospital's new nursing scholarship program, funded by the Harrison Foundation and named in honor of Margaret Harrison, would ensure that dedicated caregivers would never have to choose between their calling and their dreams. Victoria and James, inspired by their mother's example and Emily's influence, had begun redirecting the company's resources toward healthcare initiatives and community support. The Harrison name, once synonymous with cold corporate power, was becoming associated with compassionate leadership. As Emily adjusted Richard's tie, he was finally strong enough to walk short distances. She saw in his eyes the same warmth that had first drawn her to him. "Ready to face the board?" she asked with a smile. "With you beside me, always." He kissed her softly, no longer the imperious businessman, but a man transformed by love and humility. "You know, they still can't quite believe I'm stepping down as CEO to focus on our healthcare initiatives." "The best kind of wealth," Emily said, echoing his words from months ago, "isn't in bank accounts or corporate empires. It's in the capacity to care," he finished, drawing her close, "to remain true to your principles, even when the world tries to break you." Margaret approached them, elegant in her nurse's uniform. She had returned to practice part-time, mentoring new nurses in the program that bore her name. Victoria and James followed, their former coldness replaced by a genuine warmth that grew stronger each day. As they gathered together, no longer divided by wealth or status, but united in purpose, Emily realized that sometimes the greatest love stories aren't about overcoming external obstacles. They're about the courage to remain true to yourself, the strength to forgive, and the wisdom to recognize that real wealth lies not in what you possess, but in how much you dare to care. The sun set over the garden, casting long shadows across the gathered family, a family that had learned through pain and grace that the truest form of love isn't found in power or control, but in the gentle strength of a heart brave enough to care without conditions, to love without fear, and to stand firm in the face of life's greatest challenges. In the end, it wasn't about a nurse and a millionaire finding love. It was about a family healing, about truth triumphing over fear, and about the enduring power of compassion to transform even the hardest hearts. As Emily looked around at the faces of those gathered, Richard, Margaret, Victoria, James, and all the others whose lives had been touched by their story, she knew that some battles are worth fighting, not for victory, but for the chance to show that love, in its purest form, can bridge any divide and heal any wound, if only we have the courage to let it. What would you have done in Emily's position? Would you have stood your ground against such powerful opposition, or chosen an easier path? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your perspective on this. And here's another question that's been on my mind. Have you ever had to choose between following your heart and meeting others' expectations? How did that work out for you? Your experiences might help others facing similar challenges. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Your support means everything to us. It's what keeps us going, allowing us to bring you powerful emotional stories every single day. Each subscription is a vote of confidence that helps us continue sharing these meaningful narratives with the world. And hey, see that video on the left? Trust me, you won't want to miss it. It's another powerful journey that will take you on an emotional roller coaster just like this one did. The story waiting for you there is filled with unexpected twists, deep emotions, and moments that will stay with you long after it ends. Remember, every story we share is carefully chosen to touch your heart and maybe even change your perspective on life. So go ahead, click that subscription button and join our growing family of storytellers and story lovers. Together, we're creating a space where amazing stories come to life every single day.